Dr. Schnell, I was just listening to you talk about the immunity term period for a vaccine. Can you tell me how long would the vaccine that you're working in on provide immunity? Are we talking about one-time vaccine, or are we talking about annual vaccines?
Yeah, we talk, it really depends what you use. If you use a live viral vaccine, you may get away with one inoculation. You actually need to get away with one inoculation because in the second round you neutralize your vector. With our killed one so far, we go for prime boost, but it may be actually sufficient a single inoculation. Two inoculation, I think, are reasonable too, but if a vaccine which you have to apply yearly would be very, very difficult to make people to comply with, I think. I mean, you know what happens with the influenza vaccine where you exactly have to do that. The compliance rate is normally not that great, especially in countries which have not a good infrastructure. Normally, you have people going through the area and vaccinate people. So a single-shot vaccine would be certainly the best. The second best would be a long-term prime boost where you vaccinate with other vaccines which need two inoculations. There are plenty of them. But then you would hope for a long-lasting vaccine. Like rabies, most people get immunized against rabies 3 times within a month, and a lot of them have a lifelong immunity. That would be probably the best. And if that would be possible to do that with a single inoculation, it would be even better.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. We have received quite a few questions from our listeners, and I believe we have covered about half of them over the course of the discussion. But I think there are still some more that we can maybe touch up today. Dr. Schnell, this one I think is for you. There are quite a few issues being discussed regarding use of placebos in Ebola drug trials. What is your opinion on use of placebos in control groups?
Yeah, this is difficult. I mean, you actually can't really have a control group for experiment like that because you not even will know if it's effective, because hopefully you won't actually be exposed. For example, so if you would go for high-risk people, like people which have a chance to get exposed to Ebola virus, you certainly ethically couldn't just, if you think you have a good, safe vaccine, you certainly would need to give that to all the people. And then you probably just would check by, is in general the infection rate on first responder and nurses going down, which have a really high risk. So, but you certainly wouldn't, like with a regular drug design clinical trial, to have a control group which would be not vaccinated.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Ruiz, I think you mentioned a 3-year time period for commercial production of a vaccine. One of our listeners has something regarding that. He asks, in the wake of testing of one of the experimental Ebola vaccines licensed to Merck being stopped due to vaccines causing joint pains to vaccinated volunteers, how long would it take for vaccines to be tested and safe to be made available to the public?
Well, normally before Ebola came along, traditional vaccine testing went through a phase 1 of 50 volunteers of that order of magnitude of individuals, and that trial would normally take about 1 year, and then a phase 2 safety study, which may have been several hundred individuals, which would probably have taken safety and efficacy would have probably taken several years, 2 years, and then a phase 3 trial, which could have been a 3-year time frame, and this would have been a very accelerated program, again, prior to Ebola. So you really would be looking at, a 6, 7, 8 year time frame through clinical trials. With Ebola, the regulatory agencies, both here in the U.S., the FDA, and in Europe, the EMA, European Medicines Authority, have agreed that they will fast-track the clinical trials for Ebola, so they'll respond to all of the paperwork needed to move forward on clinical trials as quickly as possible. So we really are seeing phase 1 clinical trials being done in very short time frames, literally 6 months type of time frames. The phase 2 trials that are going to be started shortly appear to also to be planned to be very short in length, approximately 1 year. And then the plans for phase 3 trials haven't been completely disclosed, but again, those tend to look like they will be a very short time frame. So I would say from today, there is the possibility that a Ebola vaccine virus could have completed a phase 2 and phase 3 trial in a little over 2 years. How long it would take for the regulatory authorities to review that information and then approve that vaccine would probably be a very short period of time, considering the urgency needed. But, I mean, there's a crisis going on today, and there's really a need for a therapy or a vaccine today, but literally we're 2 years or more away from having that product at least approved by a regulatory agency.
Trials which normally take years and decades are being fast-tracked on a time scale of weeks and months. Dr. Schnell, what could be some of the disadvantages of fast-forwarding vaccine trials?
Again, I didn't. What would be the advantage of
fast-forwarding the vaccine trials? Since normally they take years and decades. So the listener wants to know if we are fast-tracking some of the trials, and what could be some of the disadvantages of doing so?
I mean, the advantage of doing that is that you just get a faster answer if it's working and if it's safe, especially if it's safe, and then you can go further into testing. So it's certainly the advantage that we get a faster answer.
Are there any disadvantages of doing it so quick?
Disadvantages?
I
think if you follow your protocols, you can get the answers just faster. You know, a lot is not only doing the clinical work. A lot is also to deal with the regulatory agency, and that can take for months. So if they respond faster because they realize it's really urgent, then you really can cut out months out of that process. So it doesn't have to be a higher risk to do it fast. And I certainly think the regulatory agencies will look into that not unnecessary risks are taken.
There is one area that has been shown in the past with vaccines related to risk, and this is a rare risk that may show up only in very large populations. So if one moves through quickly in small groups, you may miss this rare adverse events or side effects that could occur with the vaccine. But again, one has to measure the risk versus the benefit, and I'm sure the regulatory agencies will ultimately have to look at that.
Yeah. I mean, if you look, if you do a phase 1 and you have 50 people, and you will say you get negative effect in 5, then that's 10%. So that's something very obvious. If you have a risk which, based on our genetic, which is quite different in different people, a risk which will only occur in 1 of 10,000, you literally need 10,000 people. And that certainly can be easily done. So therefore, we normally check also in vaccines in the long run, and every side effect is reported, and then it's checked if that is actually related to the vaccine.
We are almost to the last question. One of our listeners write in asking that most people considered Ebola to be a disease that was happening in a far-off country, and now it's knocking at our doors. What should people in America be cautious about?
Washing their hands to prevent flu. I think realistically, the probability of Ebola occurring here in outbreak here in the U.S. would be pretty minimal. It is like any other infectious disease, and there are a lot of potential barriers in place to prevent the spread of Ebola, even if we would have one or more individuals that would arrive in the in the U.S. that would be carrying the Ebola virus. I think our healthcare infrastructure could quickly isolate and care for those individuals and prevent any type of spread that you've seen in Africa. So I really I think that there's been too much media hype related to Ebola, where it's generated a lot of concern here in the U.S. and Europe, and I think the probability of a spread in Western countries would be very low at this point in time.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz and Dr. Schnell. We wish your team the very best in getting this Ebola vaccine ready for use and for saving a lot of lives. Thank you very much for being here with us.